And today we are going to do another one of the CARB Hall of Fame 2020 inductee videos. And today we're going to be talking about Cliff Lilly, and we've got Roy Lilly here with us. Roy, I know this has got to be a big thrill for you and your family because, gee, it's just such a great thing to be involved with CARB and to be inducted into the CARB Hall of Fame.
Right, absolutely. Was looking forward to this for some time, and I'm representing my father because he can't be here. He lives in Arkansas, but yeah, we're excited about this.
Yeah, I know how you feel. It's just such an honor and a privilege because CARB, and like I was talking yesterday with one of the other inductees, I don't think there are very many places around the country that have a club like we do that honors the people that have been involved in racing for so many years.
I've never heard of one.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Roy, it seems like your dad at age 7 really got the opportunity to be introduced to racing.
Yeah.
And I think it was with his grandmother. And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was my grandmother, his mother.
Yeah.
My grandfather had passed away the year before, and so when he turned 7, she felt bad for him, so she took him to La Plata, Missouri, to the county fairgrounds, and he watched his first jalopy race, and that's when he decided then that he wanted to be a race car driver. And that's pretty much it for that period of time. And
you just got the bug, man, right off.
Yeah, he got the bug at that early age.
Here we go. I think you want to tell this story about the person that came up with this?
Yes. So when he was around 20 years old, he was working in Manhattan, Kansas, doing plumbing construction. He worked for a big company. And one of the guys that he worked with one day walked up to him and said, listen, my brother has a race car that he races at Powers Racetrack, south of Manhattan here, and the boy that was driving the car was killed in it. And he goes, was wondering to know if you would want to drive the car.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my dad immediately jumped on that. And so he's first time out with the car. He come back in and said it was ill handling. He goes, I don't know if I can drive this thing. And another driver come up to him and told him, you know, you got to weld up that rear end and lock those axles. And he goes, no, I didn't know that. So they did that.
At the track.
At the track.
At the track.
They always had a welder on the back of the truck at the track.
Uh-huh.
And so they welded up, and he went back out. And in the feature, of course, because he was a rookie, he started at the rear, and he worked his way halfway up the pack in his first race.
Yeah. One thing I might add about I think it was this photo that we just saw. Didn't the lady in Manhattan, contacted you and then had a bunch of information? I'd never heard of of this racetrack before.
Right.
Powers.
Right, Powers. So I asked Dad, I go, so what was the name of the track? He goes, well, I don't remember. So I got a hold of this lady in Manhattan, and she is the curator of the museum, plus she has the archives. You know, she's the lady you go to when you want to know something about Manhattan.
Yeah.
And she's the one that sent me an email, wonderful email, all about Mr. Powers, who owned the track, him and his brother, and the track was only open for 2 years. And she was putting things in there about his grandfather and where was he born, and I was like, oh my. So I sent her, thanked her, and asked her to please don't do any more digging.
Do you have any idea where this photo or this was taken at? And all I can say is the person that prepared the track and nowadays might be in a little trouble.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I know the tracks that he did race at. It could have been any one of them.
Yeah.
I just don't know the looks of it there.
No guardrails.
No guardrails, and
lots of Flying Saucer.
Was it Flying Saucer? Okay. That's in Platte City.
Platte City. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, really?
Yeah.
I think I actually went to a race there once, but I couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. But anyway.
Yeah. And so that's the kind of cars they ran at the time, which
Yeah.
is usually 36, 37 Fords.
Uh-huh.
And
Well, he finally gets this interest in racing, but what were some of the circumstances about his first involvement in racing? Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened and came about, and who he was racing for or with? Or
yes. Well, even when he was there, he didn't really know those guys. But when he started racing at Riverside, he took his closest friends with him. And when he went and raced at Flying Saucer Speedway in Platte City, again, a lot of them lived around there. So these are the people who originally was his pit crew, and they all wanted to race. So his closest friend, who was Junior West, he had a 36 Ford. My dad had a 36 Ford. Well, Junior, first time out, crashed his and just tore it all to pieces, and he was done.
Yeah.
His racing career was kaput. He was over it. And my dad kept going. And so then they heard about these 32 Ford coupes from Springfield, Missouri, that they had been outlawed, and so they were selling them, and they were selling them dirt cheap. So him and his buddies, they all went down there. They bought 4 of them. He bought 2, and they bought 2, and brought them back up to Kansas City, and that was actually the first car that he built as a race car. The others were cars somebody else had built.
Okay.
So this was his first one.
Yeah.
32 Ford flathead engines.
He loved those flatheads.
Yes, he
Yep.
he was all about flathead motors.
Yeah.
You know.
I believe in 1950. This was not during 1953 to 56 that he picked up. They actually went down and bought 4 of them.
Right.
In Springfield and brought them back up here, and then I'm sure he proceeded to make his little tweaks and whatever on the cars.
Yeah, he did.
But did they race any place other than Riverside? I mean.
Yes, he also raced at Olympic, and he raced at Excelsior Springs. Excelsior Springs had a track back then. He raced there. Savannah, Missouri. So they were small tracks around in this area, so they didn't have to travel too far. He had the same trailer for years. I remember that. It was a tilt trailer. And somewhere in there's pictures of him taking the car off the trailer at Excelsior Springs.
We will see it here in a little bit, I think. But while we're at it, this picture that's up here now, is this the car now that he built with the Crosley?
Yes.
Which we had a picture of the original car earlier. That we kind of flew by there. I'm going to tell you the truth. You sent me so many pictures. I think there was 48, if I remember, or something like that.
I wasn't sure.
And I kind of had to limit the time on them because I figured we'd probably do 30 or 40-minute interview to about a minute each. But anyway, that was one of the car that he put the Crosley body on.
Right. He had well, I know you've heard of the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yeah.
He actually knew the Hatfields from Macon, Missouri, where he hung out at when growing up. And they had a farm out near Excelsior Springs, and they told him, well, we got cars out here. If you come out and you want a body or something, we'll just give it to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he went out there, and the first thing he seen was this Crosley body. Well, he already knew the width of his frame, so he measured it, and it was perfect. He said it was within he told me, he goes, I couldn't believe it was within a quarter of an inch. So you'll see pictures of him. They rolled it over on its side, and he actually took a cutting torch and cut all the running gear, took the engine out, and the only part he used was just the back part of the body.
Back part, like they did in the modifieds in those days. Yeah. Here we've got a what do you want to call it, brochure? I can't have the right term, but from Platte County.
I think it was an ad. Was it a flyer?
Yeah. I love this, mission $1.25.
Yes. They can't afford that, can they? $1.25? How could
course,
they afford that?
of course, they were probably racing race cars that totally cost $500 maybe or less.
Right.
So in comparison to today's
Sure.
economy, shall we say, it's
Yeah.
about the same. Um, your dad really starts kind of rolling off a few good years though, and this would have been like 56 to 59 or 60 somewhere in there.
Yes.
But he actually in that period he's doing really well in a lot of the points races in the area here around Kansas City, and in fact is finishing second to Jerry Weld, I think, 2 years in a row.
Right.
Now, was that at Riverside or Olympic or?
That was at Riverside, and he, through the winter months, he would tear that Ford Flathead down, and he knew that engine inside and out. He knew tricks to it. He knew things to do to it. They were legal things to do to it, but that was a claimer motor. And whenever they would claim a motor from him, because he would win the feature, they would take it home, put it in their car, come back, it wouldn't run right. And it's because he knew all the things to do, that they didn't. And so those 2 years, he almost beat Jerry in the points championship. He won a lot of features, and so did Jerry. And so it went back and forth. But he established that he was a really good driver at the time, and his name became well known in the racing community.
Here around Kansas City. Well,
Right.
these are some beautiful cars we're looking at. That's a nice one there, absolutely. 60 through 64, he actually kind of starts driving for some other people. Can you tell us who some of those were?
Yeah, that was, the first person was John Nelson, who had a 32 Ford body sedan. But he had the car, and he had no motor, and no driver. So he was talking to my dad about if he got a motor, would he drive it? He said yes. So he looked in the ads in the paper, and here was Albert Acton with a engine, a dragster motor. So he had a motor with he was looking for a car. So they put this dragster motor in that car, and they drove it at Olympic.
Okay.
And the thing would fly down the straightaways. It was unbelievable fast, but the chassis was horrible, and so it didn't do good in the turns. So then the next year, right down the street from where John Nelson lived was Harry Graves. And Harry was another Ford. He loved the Ford engine, and so he had a car. And you saw one picture there. It's a white Sportsman with the gold numbers on it, number 8. So he drove for Harry for that year, and they started to win a few races with it. Not a lot, but a few. And then the next year he went in with Albert Acton in a partnership, and they built a car together called Blue Angel, number 17.
Okay.
And that was built down in Avondale.
And, in Avondale? Just across the road
right,
here?
just right across the road.
The other side of the hospital?
Yep,
Really?
exactly, yep. That's where that car is built.
Wow.
And the story with that is that right next door, Ron Joy, who had the Avondale radiator.
Oh, yeah, it's still there.
I saw him about 4 years ago. I stopped in to say hello to him and couldn't get over the. He goes, I can't believe you're here. And he says, I got to tell you though, the guy that owns the building next door, which was the Acton Standard Service, he said they said the roof was leaking, so they got a guy out there to fix the roof, and he pulled down a sheet metal piece, and it was the number 17 on it, the blue side panel to that Blue Angel
To
car.
the Blue Angel was part of the roof?
Yeah, it was part of the roof. They used to patch the roof. And he told me, he goes, if you want it, I'll give it to you. I said, no, you keep it. You keep it.
I think that you're talking about that filling station that's next door.
Yeah.
There's a race car driver who owns that now too, and I can't remember what his name is. I know I shouldn't bring it up if I can't tell you who it is. But he drove late models up at I-35.
Oh, really?
Had a serious injury and had to drop out.
Oh.
Anybody?
Not me. I don't know. Sorry.
And anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Shouldn't interrupt.
Oh no, that's pretty much the story on that car and everything.
Okay.
But the real thing that happened right then was that we always went to Indianapolis, or we always went to Albert's home.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad and him would work on the race car, and my sister and I would play with Albert's kids. They're in the driveway,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd listen to the Indy 500 race. And it was there, and this was kind of a turning point in that listening to the race, I remember my dad saying, you can always hear those novis above and beyond the other engines, the Offenhausers
Mm-hmm.
and all the rest of them. And he said that V8 engine just produced unbelievable horsepower. And he goes, I wonder how the chassis does with that. Well, then he kept reading about it and
Mm-hmm.
finding out more about it, and so that's when they heard that the chassis that was working and had won 6 out of the 8 races was A.J. Watson's
A.J. Watson, absolutely.
chassis.
Yeah.
So they bought into that whole thing, and
Yeah.
they sent off. They found in Speed Sport News, they found an ad
Mm-hmm.
where Watson had shortened the design up and made a sprint car chassis.
Uh-huh.
So they bought the blueprints for that, and that's when I joined him in our shop, which
Mhm.
was below where we lived, and we started building these 5 sprint cars, these A.J. Watson designed chassis sprint cars. That is one of them right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I love it when the pictures match what we're talking about.
Yeah, finally, right?
I try to plan it that way, but it doesn't always work. But anyway, your dad really kind of became a follower or admirer or whatever. I mean, I know one of the questions on the form was for
Mhm.
CARB was who did he kind of look up to? And I think
Yeah.
A.J. Watson kind of filled the bill for that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Don Edmonds and A.J. Watson
Yeah.
both. I left that out about Don Edmonds. He'd actually built, that was one of the earlier pictures too.
Okay.
Is before he did this about Watson, he did build this Don Edmonds chassis, again from blueprints that we sent off to
Right.
California.
Right.
And but that car, it handled okay. It wasn't awesome, but
Uh-huh.
it handled okay, and it needed a lot of things. So, and he ran he bought my mom a 64.5 Mustang.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah, it had a 289 high performance motor in it, which was new at the time. And so he gives it to my mom, and she goes, "What's wrong with my T-Bird?" And he goes, "Nothing. I bought this for you." And he goes, "Oh, okay." He says, "Run it for 500 miles and get it back to me, and I'll change the oil." And she said, "Okay." So did that, and then he gives it back to her. She drives it a couple of days. She turns around and gives it back to him and says, "There's something wrong with that car." And he says, "Well, what's wrong?" She goes, "It hasn't got any power, no power." And he says, and he goes, then I was forced to tell her, well, I pulled the motor out and put that in the race car and just put a regular 289 back in the Mustang. And then my mom didn't want to talk to him for like 2 weeks.
Oh, that's funny. I love that.
And he blew the warranty on the car too at the same time, all in one whack.
As you say, around this time, Cliff is opening a speed shop there in Clay Como,
Right.
and we'll talk about some of the connections we just learned
Sure.
about here in the last few days about
Yeah.
that. But some of the work that he did in the speed shop were like torsion bars, and I think you kind of played a little hand in Jacob's ladders and some
Mhm.
other items
Yeah.
that they built. But like you say, he was becoming pretty well known, and people were realizing that the guy had something going. So he kind of started developing some followers, shall
Yeah.
we say, of his own.
Yeah.
And can you just tell us who a few of those people were
Sure.
that were frequenting the shop there in
Yeah.
Clay Como?
Well, probably, well, a lot of the guys were coming to him because we had this 8-foot lathe, and we could build the torsion rods and the torsion arms, bars, and everything. But those torsion rods are a special kind of metal, special kind of splines, and they twist. So they twist at different rates. Well,
Mhm.
he knew how to get the several different ones made, and so they were coming from all over to buy them from me, and we were always making them. And so he had that. This car here that you see in there, it had a problem with leaning too far, and the right rear tire would rub into the body. And so they kept changing things, and I remember asking him, what is it what prevents it from that? And he says, just Jacob's ladder down here. And he said, look at it. And he was rattling it. And he goes, it doesn't work right now. So I took all the measurements and everything off of it. And then when I was at school, I had drafting class. I redesigned it.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. And then
drafting class.
Drafting class. And then I got in trouble because it wasn't part of my schooling. And my teacher called my dad and said, I need you to come up here. I need to talk to you. And he says, what's that about? And he says, well, he's doing something he says is for your race car.
Yeah.
And so my dad's looking at it and he goes, yeah, that's a Jacob's ladder, you know. He goes, oh, so it's a real thing. He goes, oh yeah, it's a real thing.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah.
Who were some of the guys that kind of hung out at the shop there? They came around, like I say, that wanted Cliff to do some work. Before we go any further, tell us about this photo. I know this is important here.
This is an important photo in that this is A.J. Watson's shop out in California. And if you notice all these chassis there, they're built on the floor. The floor was actually the jig. They didn't really use a metal, plate metal jig. They built them on the floor. They're all identical. Over on the wall, if you look at real close, you'll see more of them, the sides of them, that they're getting ready to build some more. So when these come out, they'll build some more of them. Well, that was the IndyCar chassis that he'd been winning with. So when my dad seen that, and then he saw the ad that they had for the blueprints, that's when he sent off for it. So he had that, the blueprints. We had plans to build 5 of them. We actually only built 3, only because the other 2 guys didn't have the money.
No, excuse me, is this your dad's shop in Clickhoma?
That's my dad on the right there with the white T-shirt. That's John Hughes to the left there, who was in his pit crew. You can see the fiberglass tail and nose. You can see the argon injectors to the left behind John's head there. You know.
Yeah.
And that's so what they're putting in there is a refrigerator. And and the reason they're putting a refrigerator in there is because the Ford engine overheated a lot. And we would take these milk cartons and fill them up with water and freeze them. And then when we'd come in after a heat race, we'd pull the hood, lay a block of ice on the radiator and cover it with shop towels. We had to do that all the time because it was always overheating. And you had to get it cooled down for the next race.
Yeah. Now, is this one of them that your dad built here? Yeah,
that's the same. Well, we called them the 3 sisters because they were all 3 identical. Starting out. And the other changes that were made later was that 2 of them were run Ford engines and 1 run AAA.
Okay. Sounds like quite an operation in Clickhoma there.
If you look at the chassis, you'll see it looks very similar to the one that A.J. Watson pictured. It's just more narrow, shorter.
Right. In '69, Cliff starts getting involved in the IMCA racing. And there again, it's in the A.J. Watson cars.
Right.
And he starts building and selling them. The interesting story about the roll cages, of course, I think in this period that we're talking about is when roll cages first started coming into existence.
Right.
And they were bolt-on.
Bolt-on.
Which I never could see that. I'm thinking, I've seen lots of bolts snap in my life. When they flip and stuff, the stress that they have to face has got to be something. But tell us about the bolts that your dad came up with.
Well, just like in this picture here, this is one of those cars that we built. That's Kenny Fireball Baker. And even his is bolt-on. If you could look up close enough to it, you can see it's bolt-on. But on my dad's, a guy that kind of admired him came up to him and said, I got this brown bag of for the bolts for you to put that roll cage on. And so he looked at them, and they were perfect size and everything, and he put them on. And he says, "What are these?" And he says, "Well," he goes, "there's titanium bolts that are 100,000-pound tensile strength." And he says, "Then there's super titanium bolts that are 140,000-pound tensile strength." And he says, "This is the ones that we used at the TWA overhaul plant to mount the jet engines on the."
Oh, really?
Yeah. He says, "That's what those are." And so we used to joke and we'd say, many, many years from now, the car will be completely gone and those bolts will be laying on the ground. That'll be the only thing left. They'll still be there.
During this IMCA period, how deeply involved was he in IMCA? I mean, was it just locally, or did he travel with them?
He was very into it. He was practically only one of them running a Ford engine, and so they traveled to all the fairground races and all over. I believe it was 14 states.
Okay.
Tampa, Florida. We always went down there for speed weeks and everything.
Yeah.
He ran at Knoxville with it for the Nationals, and there was a lot of one-off tracks that they would try in different parts of the country too, but almost too many to mention.
Yeah. I think, I can't remember which speedway it was, but you were telling me a story about Gary Scott just kind of wanted to drive one of these A.J. Watts cars.
Yeah.
And just kind of let it known to your dad, I guess, that he wanted to do that, and your dad cooperated. Now, tell us about that.
Well, that was Bob Trossel had a guy that worked for him named Fred Kane, and Fred had been with him several years. Well, anyways, they decided to split, and Fred felt like he could design, and so he came up with a new design and built this car, and my dad bought the chassis. And it was just the chassis only, didn't even have a roll cage on it, but he bought that, and everybody was very curious about it, because it was one of the first ones, and put it together, and we had raced at Sedalia on the mile, and the car handled just awesome on a 1 mile track. And so we were in Des Moines, Illinois, and the word got around that we had this new Kane chassis, and so I had everything ready. I was with my dad at the time. I was in the pits with him, and Gary Scott come up and said, "I heard about this chassis." He says, "I was wondering sometime if you would let me like hot lap it." And my dad says, "Well, I'll just let you race it." So he raced it in that, and almost won it, but it was a very smooth chassis. It just worked awesome, and everybody liked it. So.
Yeah. He was happy with it.
Yeah, he was happy with it,
In 72 through 76, he's still really close with A.J. Watson and using those cars. And I think, if I remember right, you were saying that one of these cars that they sold to Bill Lawson and then eventually was driven by Dan Lawson.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
The picture was up there for second. It's a red. I think it was number 74. I believe was their car, and great family. So when he sold that to him, I think Bill told him at the time. He says, "I was going to let you know it won't have a Ford in it."
I'm sure that didn't last long with them, though. They probably switched it over pretty quick.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And there's pictures of it with the Chevrolet engine in it, you know.
I think when your dad was running this Fred Kane car, though, he had some pretty good runs with that. And like you were talking about, running in these 14 states, he ended up in 1 year 8th in the points and then 7th in the points. Now, was this IMCA also?
Yeah, it was IMCA. And what the thing about it is that running the Ford engines, like I said, they overheated a lot. We had a lot of problems with them. He would never give up on them. And even Ford engineers that came down and talked to him about it, and they'd give us spark plugs and make us change the plugs whether they needed it or not between the races, which is a pain in the neck. But we did all this, and so he realized got to build a new car, so he bought that built that cane car, and he said, I'm not going to do the Ford no more. So he worked out a 3-engine deal with Don Mann Speed Specialties, and they had 3 motors, one in the car, one in the hauler, and one back at the shop, and they rotated them while he went through all these races for IMCA. And so the previous car, he was always around 40th, in points at the end of the season. And then with this new car, running with Chevrolet, he finished, I believe he finished 7th, he finished 8th, and then he also finished 8th another time, tied for 8th.
Right.
And but it, and he did that for 3 years, and then so 1978, he finally stopped racing. And I asked him, I said, why did you stop right then?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, it wasn't as much fun running a Chevrolet as running a Ford. I said, okay. And,
Boy, that's a diehard right to
yeah,
the end there.
Yeah, that was, and it took it out. And I said, well, what was the most fun that you ever had racing? And he says, running with Jerry Weld back at
really?
Riverside
Yeah,
in the Olympic.
yeah.
He says, always trying to beat each other all the time.
Yeah.
And they were great friends. They were good friends.
Yeah. Did he have in particular highlight of his racing career that he was really proud of or talked about all the time? Or
I think the A.J. Watson chassis, building that, and finding out all these things about it, and the people that took interest in it, and he realized that brought his racing standards way up, because now he's running on 1-mile tracks. And he told me, he said that car would go so fast. He says at the 1 mile at Sedalia, he said the guy that made the upholstery, he said also made me a face mask that fit in there, and he said going down that back straightaway on that 1 mile, he says it would come back and cut the air off where he couldn't breathe.
Yeah, I think this is a picture of
That's
your dad.
him. That's Dad.
Is this recent?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's down in Arkansas.
He's in Gassville, Arkansas. He's 90 years old.
Gassville?
Gassville.
Like appropriate, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it? I told him that too, and he just laughed.
Absolutely. But just out of the blue, he just kind of quits racing and starts rebuilding airplanes. I mean, did he ever have a reason why? Or
Well, my grandfather flew airplanes, and my dad had always flown airplanes. He was in the Army Air Corps, and as children, we flew all the time. One time my teacher called my mom up and said, well, your son is like come up with these fantastic lies. And she was like, what? And she said, well, he said that over the weekend that him and his dad jumped in a plane and flew to Nebraska to Omaha and had a cheeseburger and a Coke and flew back. And then the next night they went to the races and his dad won the race. And my mom says, well, there's a problem there. It's the truth.
It's the truth.
It's the truth. So yeah. He took great pride in that he could take these planes and they'd be basket cases, and he would fly out, look at them, buy them, and they would bring them back on trailers and basket cases. He'd put them completely, rebuild them down there in Arkansas, and turn around. And his thing was, if you come and buy from him, he gets to fly it to wherever you live. Yeah, so he had doctors and lawyers and people coming up from Florida. So he was always making these.
Going back and forth.
So he loved that.
Yeah, I bet he did. An interesting story that you related to me, Roy, that I find just so interesting, that kind of connects your dad's time into our time.
Right.
And that is, you were telling me about in the shop up in Claycomo, a kid walks in there right out of high school.
Yes.
And approaches your dad and says, I would really like to learn or be able to have a machine shop of my own. And I'll let you tell the rest of it.
Yeah, this kid, he was right out of high school. He had already been working at a machine shop in Foxwood, but he felt like he could do it his own. So someone told him, "Oh, if you're looking for a place, you might go and talk to Cliff Lilly. He has this new building there, and he's got a plumbing shop and a speed shop, and So I was sitting on the steps when he come walking in, and he said, "Yeah." He goes, my dad says, "What's your name?" He says, "Raymond Littrell," and he said, I want to learn how to build racing engines, and he says, and you could see all of our race cars and everything. He was like, I'm in the right place,
Yeah.
So my dad said, yeah. So he rented him a corner, and they brought in a hot tank and a bench and started doing the heads. That's where he really started right there.
Yeah. You might say the legacy lives on, Roy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, probably one of the best known racing engine builders in the Kansas City area now. And it kind of, like I say, it kind of come from your dad, so to speak.
Well, they traded a lot of information back and forth on these racing engines, but Raymond's company just did everyday motors, like everyday engines. But the interest was always in doing racing engines, and so we did trade a lot of information back and forth. The shop was, he sold him another building eventually. It used to be a cabinet shop, and he sold him that, and they made it into this machine shop. And I worked, it was like one of the first jobs I ever had as a teenager. I worked in there doing parts for him. But that was the beginning of a lot of things right then. It was all right there around 1967, 68, 60, right in there, And Raymond and I was close.
Close friend. Well, this time, like I say, has got to be really special for you, Roy, and especially your family also. So let me once again congratulate you on your dad, Cliff, being inducted into the Hall of Fame. It's a special time.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to thank all of you, too. So I almost can't talk right now. I'm kind of emotional.
That's okay. I get there myself. Go ahead. When you're ready. Like I say, I know it's just got to be a special time. It's something that only comes along once in a lifetime.
Sure. And I know he would love it if he was here right now. He can't be, but he had a list of people, a lot of people that he wanted to thank, and it was too long to even, it was a lifetime of people.
I imagine. Yeah. Congratulations, Roy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.